I'd now like to introduce Professor Roger Mackett, Emeritus Professor, no less these days, of Transport Studies at the University College London. And he's done an awful lot of research that I'm going to let him tell you all about. Thank you.
Emeritus just means I'm old. I now work part-time at University College London, just around the corner. But I also work for the Department for Transport 1 day a week as a member of the Disabled Persons Transport Advisory Committee, which I'm doing for the last 3 years. And what I found, this is an area which has almost no research or evidence backing it up. Large decisions, expensive decisions are made on the basis of almost no evidence. It's quite extraordinary. And in particular, when I started working at DIPTAC, as it's called, all the interest at the Department of Transport seemed to be on physical disabilities around, for example, and tend to be around engineering solutions. So, for example, putting in lots of ramps, shared space is a big issue, tactile paving for people with visual impairments, but almost nothing, or should we say nothing done, people with a whole range of mental impairments, which does include mental health, dementia, autism, and these were just totally neglected within the sort of present regime at the Department for Transport. So I took it on myself, wearing my academic hat, to look at all the evidence that was lying around, which there is quite a lot, but I need to pull it all together and put it into a report, just to see where do we stand on what do we know about this whole area of what can be done to make life better for people with these whole range of mental impairments. Now, this afternoon I'm going to concentrate particularly on mental health. Simply because of the time limit. The same sort of things largely apply to people with these other conditions such as dementia, but it's not quite the same, so we're focused very much on mental health, which includes things like anxiety, depression, agoraphobia, schizophrenia. I mean, anxiety and depression are the two big ones which cover, and a lot of people with other mental health conditions have anxiety and to some extent depression issues. And the effects include things like panic attacks, loss of self-confidence, and difficulty making decisions. So those are the kind of effects. Now, when you think about when you're travelling, those can be quite important. And so those are the issues I want to talk about. And it's a big area. I mean, according to the Health Survey of England, 26% of all adults in England have been diagnosed with one or more mental illnesses sometime in their past, not necessarily at present. One thing you need in mind, that we're talking about an illness. I mean, unlike, say, something like dementia, once you acquire dementia, it essentially tends to deteriorate. Mental health is about an illness, and so for many people do get better. So it's not something which is necessary for the person's whole life. So many of those people, the 26%, who have been diagnosed in the past, no longer have the condition. There are all sorts of things, and there are all ways of ameliorating it through medication and so on. As well as the 26%, another 18%, so they've experienced a mental illness without being diagnosed. Otherwise, they say they've been depressed. So that is quite a large proportion of the population, and it's very expensive. I mean, it's costing us a lot of money in this country. Now, just talking about one particular aspect, travel can help people with mental health. Two aspects. One is the actual travelling, because it brings people in chance to interact with others, staff, fellow travellers, actually can help some people with mental health conditions. That came out of some focus group work done for the Department for Transport back in 2008, just sitting down talking to people with various conditions, some of whom had mental health conditions, and that was found to be quite positive. But also, travelling neighbours obviously to get to places, and Whitley and Prince, working in North London, did some surveys on the effects of the Freedom Pass, that is the pass to give free travel on public transport to people with a certain mental health condition, and it did find that the actual opportunity to get to services, facilities and social support did actually help to relieve some of the symptoms. So, looking at some evidence from the Life Opportunities Survey, which was carried out by the Department of Work and Pension, unfortunately it's now ceased. But I was going to do some rework of the data to establish why people don't use various modes of transport as much as they would like. And we compare this with the public in general, so the whole population. So the whole population, why don't people use buses as much as they like? Well, they haven't got a bus. Now, we can spend the whole afternoon talking about deterioration in bus service in this country, but we won't. So the main reason people don't use a bus is they haven't got one. Outside London, buses are quite rare in some parts of the country, as some of you will know. Second reason is cost. Bus drive is quite expensive if you pay your fare, particularly again outside London, and other reasons. If you look at people with mental health conditions, it's rather different. The top reason they don't travel by bus is because they are anxious. They lack the confidence to use the bus. Then cost, and then buses not being available. So there we've got a very different kind of profile of why people don't use the bus as much as they would like. If we look at taxis, again, for the public, much the same. Cost is now top. There's not a taxi available, and various other reasons. People with mental health conditions, very different. Cost, again, is top, not surprisingly, partly because the same as everybody else, but also, of course, many people with mental health conditions don't have a full-time job. They can't keep a job because of their condition, and so on. So here, anxiety and lack of confidence is, in this case, second, but still very important. And thirdly, difficulty to get in and out of taxi, which relates to the whole issue of accessing the taxi, not just physically, but negotiating with the driver and so on. Third and lastly on this thing, local trains, people in general, it's cost, no train available. For people with mental health conditions, it's all about cost again, but anxiety, lack of confidence. So we very clearly get a headline figure that the real issue, why people with mental health issues don't travel on public transport, is because of anxiety and lack of confidence. If you look at people with sort of physical disabilities, that's not the reason at all. It's much obviously to do with physical conditions, getting to the bus stop and so on. So let's think about what causes that anxiety and lack of confidence. There seem to be two areas, looking at the evidence. One is to do with just finding the way and not getting lost. And secondly, the fact is you need to interact with other people. If you're travelling by car, you don't need to interact with other people. But if you're travelling by public transport or walking, then there's plenty of scope. Sometimes you need to interact. If you're going on the bus, you need to buy your bus ticket, talk to the bus driver, and you've just got members of the public around you on the bus, possibly causing crowding and so on. Let's take those two separately. How do we make a journey? Now, we could sit down and think about how you got to your place here today. Some of you won't be familiar with it, but you need information is absolutely fundamental. Some you'll recall from your memory how to find places in London, but also you pick up clues from the environment, some quite explicit, from signposting, but others to do with your general sense of direction, to do with your ability to read the environment, find the way using landmarks and so on. Then you need to kind of process that information and take a decision. Do I turn left here? Do I turn right? And so on. Now, people with mental health issues do find decision-making quite difficult. I remember my family who has a mental health condition, or has had, and actually finds taking decisions quite hard. Just basically being indecisive. So this whole anxiety thing, is this the right way to go? What do I do if I get lost? So this is part of the problem. And then the interaction with other people revolve around two themes, I think. One is communication, and one is behavioural issues. So you've got to communicate, say, with staff, bus drivers, if you want information to buy your ticket, possibly in the ticket office, and so on. But also other travellers. You may want to talk to them at the bus stop, you may need to ask the way, and so on. The whole behaviour issue, some quite interesting evidence from surveys done in the West Midlands showing how badly behaved some other people are, and this causes quite a lot of distress. And of course, it's not just the fact that the bad behaviour is occurring, the fact you may believe there's going to be bad behaviour may deter you. So there's people get quite intimidated, for example, by groups of school children on the bus. The children are not usually behaving badly. It's simply the fact they can be very noisy, they can be shouting at each other, not meaning any harm, but some people find that quite intimidating, and it does deter them from travelling. But also there may be some concern about how people perceive your behaviour. They may think, you're looking lost, you're looking confused. People get quite concerned about the perception other people have of them. So that, again, can deter people from travelling. So I say these are all conditions which may affect people's willingness to make a trip. And, of course, the whole anxiety thing also rolls around the fact, not only can I get from A to B, but can I get back from B to A? If you don't have the confidence in the bus service to get you home, then you've got problems. Another thing happens, if buses turn short and you're suddenly chucked off, said, find your own way from here, you've got to find another bus, that again causes lots of anxiety. And so it's not just the fact it happens, it's the fact you fear it might happen is part of the problem. Some interesting figures from the National Rail Passenger Survey. How many people buy their train tickets? Many of us buy their train tickets in advance. We buy them on the internet. Now, that's fine if you can be confident that you're going to make a journey next week time. If you've got a mental health condition, many people's conditions fluctuate day to day, week to week, so they cannot be sure that they can buy a train ticket for a journey next week. So they've got to buy on the day. And here we can see from the National Rail Passenger Survey, people with no impairment and the whole population with some sort of disability and so on, 12% buy their tickets on the day. With mental health conditions, twice as many, nearly 23%, have to buy their train ticket on the day. Does that matter? Yes, it does. Look at the figures underneath. This was an email I got on the very day I was making this PowerPoint. If you want to go from Euston to Manchester, £27 you book in advance. On the day, £82.90. So some of the mental health condition is being forced because they cannot be confident they can travel to pay, about 3 times as much for their fare. And a lot of those people have got a very low income. So here we've got a very big barrier to travel. The fact they cannot decide in advance, I'm going to take a journey next week. So you can begin to see life is quite hard. What can we do? Well, I've got a range of suggestions here of things we can do, which again all come out of the literature. We can improve the skills of travellers. I'll take these each one at a time in a minute. We can improve information prior to travel to give more confidence. And that's what most of these things are about. They're about giving more confidence to travel. You can make the local environment easier to understand, more legible if you like. Provide electronic information during the course of the journey, and to provide support when lost. And we can improve communication both with the staff and other travellers. Right, let's run through these. You can provide travel training. Now, this is more geared up with other kind of mental conditions, but nonetheless, it may be approached some people with mental conditions just to give them, again, the confidence how to use buses, trains. It might seem very obvious. Those who are in the room, we know we all use the bus with great confidence. But if you lack confidence, knowing how to interact with the driver and so on is quite a big issue. And there's, again, examples just providing tours around bus stations, train journeys, which, again, are all about building up confidence, knowing how to do things, how you can deal with change and uncertainty. We can provide much clearer timetables and maps. I don't really understand why all the bus timetables in this country are different. There's no great logic to that. It would be so much easier for all of us, not just people with mental health conditions, if there was a standard form of good practice for bus timetable, which could then be emulated. So that if you go to a new area, you can read the timetable and understand it. Some go vertically, some go horizontally, some are 24 hours, some are 12 hours. There's no logic to that. And again, if you have got a mental impairment of some sort, mental health or whatever, and you've learnt how to use one sort of timetable, and then you get to an area which is something different, it actually can throw you quite a lot. But it would also make life easier for the rest of us. And again, informational websites, again, there are clear standards for that, but they're not often followed, or quite often a website starts off with good practice, then over time it deteriorates and so on. Clutter. I mean, if you're trying to navigate your way around the local environment and you find it quite hard to make decisions, you find the world a bit confusing, then we could make life a lot easier. These are just two examples I took in St Albans. Again, both are a bit confusing if you're finding the world a bit hard to deal with. So we could do an awful lot more to reduce street clutter, make the environment less confusing. We could put in a lot more clear numbers. I mean, London's got an awful lot better than last few years. I mean, London is a marvellous place to find where random. You know, the whole signposts. Really, I find them disorientating when they're upside down, the maps. But anyway, because I think of a map, or my maps always have north at the top. But anyway, they don't always. But we could do an awful lot more. And I would say London does a lot with the whole Legible London scheme. But elsewhere in the country, it's not nearly so good. Audiovisual information on buses and trains is coming in, but it doesn't exist in all the country. If you live in London, you get so used to good quality information, but once you go outside, I was the other day with someone lives in Salford. He was saying, "How terrible in Salford. You know, most buses don't have audiovisual information. We bought a whole lot of new buses, they don't have it." I was quite surprised, but that is the case. And of course, many people have mobile phones in their pockets which have got clever apps on. There's a slight danger going down the electronic route with the assumption that if you design an app, it'll work. It may work for you, it may not work with the person with a mental health condition. They don't tend to be evaluated very well. They tend to be done by, in my experience, students at university do it as a project. They develop an app, that's a good project for a student, and then it gets kind of sold off. But they don't tend to be tested very well. There's a poor level of evaluation, in my experience, of a lot of these apps. They do need to be tested to make sure they do deliver. Safe places, if you know about safe, if you live in the north of England, you know about safe places. You don't tend to get them in the south. They tend to be something you see much more, particularly in Yorkshire, as the home of the safe place. It's a very simple scheme. It's simply that many offices, local public offices, should we say, local authority offices, other people like John Lewis and Sainsbury's, other sort of good companies, in my opinion, will have a member of staff who is trained to help people who go to them and say, "I'm lost." They will understand that people need help. And many people with these conditions will carry a card with their carer on or a member of their family. They can show it to the member of staff in the safe place who will just ring up and say, "Can you come and help? So-and-so has come in here. He or she is feeling a bit lost, a bit confused," and they will ring up and get help. Very simple scheme. It costs next to nothing, and yet it doesn't tend to happen. I won't ask who knows what the Herbert Protocol is. I suspect very few know what the Herbert Protocol is. It was actually devised for people with dementia as a scheme which means a carer gives all the information about that person to their carer, or about the person, gives it to the police, where it's logged with them about name, address, but the places they go to, their habits, and so that if they do get lost, so the carer rings up and says, "This person's got lost," the police have already got a head start to know where to go and look. Very simple scheme, again, costs next to nothing, and so on. Interaction with other people. Staff training is a very obvious one. For example, bus drivers are supposed to be trained. Well, staff training on disabilities can often be an hour a week or an hour a year. I mean, if you're lucky, or it may be a 20-minute online course. It doesn't tend to include things about people with mental impairments. It's very important, because what you need to do is train staff to understand that someone who's confused can't speak very well. They're probably not drunk, they're probably just confused. And there is a danger, and quite a lot of evidence, of people who've been dismissed as drunk who've actually got a mental health condition because of their difficulty speaking, expressing themselves. So we need to train staff to show a bit more understanding. And travel assistance cards, you probably know what these are. These are sort of credit-sized card. Show it to the driver which says, "I've got a mental health condition," or "I need a bit more time," or "Please help me count my change." All sorts of things you can do. Very simple, so you don't need to say anything out loud, so you can be much more discreet about it. Some people with mental condition need to sit down. Now, the TfL pioneered the Baby on Board scheme for pregnant women, which seems to be very successful. People do seem to offer that seat to people with a badge. And the last year they've introduced a new one, "Please offer me a seat," for people with hidden disabilities, because many people with disabilities, you can't see them. You see someone with crutches, you might well offer them your seat. Someone who's got a mental health condition, why would you, unless you actually know they need help? So the "Please offer me a seat" badge has been tested It seems to be quite successful. It does seem to be regarded as successful by TfL. And so on. Educating the public is a bit harder, but there are campaigns, you can do things. There's whole issues around hate crime, which is a big problem, and so on. Right, let me just finish there. So the main barrier to travel by people with mental health conditions is anxiety and lack of confidence. It's in their head. That's the problem. Probably related to concerns about finding the way without getting lost, communicating with other people. There are lots of ways we can do it, and a lot of them are very cheap. We're not talking about big money. I mean, building ramps and so on is pretty expensive. Lots of things are pretty cheap, but we don't tend to do it because they need continuous updating. It needs to be done all the time. All this is done in the report I produced for DIPTAC. It's meant to be on the website. Department of Transport had it since February and still not managed to put it on the website for a reason I won't go into. If you want a copy, I can send it to you. You have my card, or there's my email address there. It summarises the existing evidence as a starting point. We're hoping in the next year there will be some new research in this area done through DFT and so on. Right, I will finish there. Thank you very much.
Any questions? The microphone's just coming. If you could just say who you are and where you're from, that'd be really helpful. Thank you.
Nick Patchett from Pillar Strategy. You talked a lot about bus services. In a study, I think Access for All a while back, they identified that the number of disabled people, maybe physically, mostly they were quite on parity in terms of users of bus, but actually users of rail, there was something like 1/6 to 1/7 disabled travellers actually using the rail network. So I just wondered if there were particular points you could make about the rail network and mental health, and to say that's a limitation on people getting to work, getting to leisure, and finding employment.
Well, it certainly is. For example, the disabled person's rail card. Only 2% of disabled people have a disabled person's rail card, which seems to be quite extraordinary because it's a reasonably generous discount. We suggest that there are all sorts of barriers, and there's quite a lot of evidence in the National Rail Passenger Survey of why people don't use rail as much as they would. I say it tends to resolve around concerns about staff, attitudes of other people. I'd say it's really a need for a cultural change. Because all people with disabilities tend to use rail much less than other people. And so the fact there is a disabled person's rail card, which hardly any of them actually bother buying, they also tend to use the bus pass much less than older people. So there's a whole lot of issues, I think, which we don't understand, and there's a whole lot of things to do with access, to do with some of these things as relates to the fact to get something says you need to have a personal independence payment, a PIP, and we've had the shift from disability living allowance, and that's reduced access to lots of these things for people with these conditions. So there's a whole lot of issues I can talk about if you like, but I think I don't know the answers to all these things. But
so going back to the institutional issues and cultural change, what sort of changes do you think should be applied to get those changes to, and how do you think that should be governed and delivered in transport?
I think we need to do a lot more staff. I think it's the staff are the key to this, because if you've got a disability, having a person there that you can talk to help you is absolutely key. You also have confidence that person is going to help you. So I think the biggest thing is staff training. I think getting staff to understand that someone with a disability needs help, they need a bit more time. That's the biggest single thing you can do. I mean, all staff need training, but it needs to be more than just, say 20 minutes or so on online training, because that just ticks the box. But it doesn't actually really deliver an understanding of people's needs with disability. So there's some examples, evidence up in the West Midlands of drivers actually, giving the wrong change to people with these sort of conditions and all sorts of things like that. So I think it's really around staff. And one of the problems we've got is the reduction in staffing on trains. There's a pressure to kind of introduce just more driver-only trains because that's cheaper. If you haven't got someone on board to help you, and if they're stopping at stations without staff, which happens quite a lot, someone with a disability just has no chance to get. They need help. So just having more staff around, particularly staff who've been well trained, I think is the key to it. That's the biggest single thing I think you can do.
Any more questions? I've got one, which is a bit of a selfish one, actually. So my father's got Alzheimer's, and so I'm learning a lot about this condition. And it strikes me that we're going to have a greater proportion of people with that in the future. What do we know about it in terms of transport? Are there any? Do we know currently how best to address the challenges of people with dementia? And can we predict what we're going to do more in the future, or is this a big hole in our research knowledge?
I think it's a big hole in our research, because one of the biggest issues about dementia, it tends to come with older age, of course. It's a deteriorating issue. So one of the big issues, which is a bit outside what we're talking about today, is giving up the car. That is one of the biggest issues, is how do you decide when someone should give up driving? Because if you've been driving all your life, or 40 or 50 years, and suddenly you're without your car, the loss of independence is huge. And of course, a lot of people have moved to rural or semi-rural areas on retirement. They give up their car and they're absolutely lost, and it is a big issue. In terms of helping people on public transport, so the evidence suggests that people should be kind of trained to use other forms of transport before they give up the car. And of course, we could do more about changing the licensing condition, because a lot of people kind of, when they're getting old, possibly getting dementia, start reducing their driving. They drive only, for example, during daytime. They avoid big cities. So there's a whole lot we can do, perhaps to encourage people to limit their driving before they actually get to a position when they should give up. But I say there's a whole lot of interesting research. It's the one area in this field where there's lots of research is about when people should give up driving. And typically it seems to be about 3 years after they acquire dementia seems to be the norm after first diagnosis. One or two people are saying they should give up as soon as they get diagnosed, but the consensus seems to be you can drive reasonably safely, and typically after about 3 years they're then told not to. But it's a big issue. Who tells them? Is it the doctor? Is it the family? And there's some evidence, certainly from America, people drive when they've been told they mustn't drive. Interesting question, and so on. So I'm not sure I answered the question, but there's sort of big things around there.
No, you did, and you've kind of confirmed my expectation that there's a lot of work to be done in this area.
And it only gets worse with dementia. That's one issue. Mental health can get better. Dementia just gets worse and worse, I'm afraid. And it's something which could face us all. That's something we all, unfortunately.
Yeah, I now know what my genes look like. So
anyway, it's not
thank
good.
you very, very much.